an incredible update here of 3 potential Userland exploits that have all come around the same time from 3 different developers working on these. So, as summed up here by Dr. Yen Yen, there is a Blu-ray bug up to 13.42 shared by Gejina, a PS5 WebKit Userland up to 13.60 on the PS5, which was shared by Jordi, and also a PS4 WebKit Userland up to 13.52, with UFM42 finding a workaround for the front-face exploit to work, which is just incredible that just overnight we now have potentially 3 new Userland exploits. Now, obviously, this will not result in new jailbreaks, unless we get a new kernel exploit that we can trigger with some of these new Userland exploits, but it will change the way we load existing exploits on the PS4 and PS5 to make jailbreaking much more convenient in the meantime, and will also be useful for chaining with any future exploits that come out. So, firstly, let's talk about the PS4 one. So, the CSS font face exploit is a WebKit exploit that we've been looking at before in previous updates. So this exploit only worked up to firmware 11.02, even though it was technically vulnerable up to firmware 13.52. So the vulnerability does exist up to the latest firmwares in the PS4, but it could only work up to 11.02, and this was because newer WebKit versions above 11.02 redesigned the CSS font face get set property handling, and the rewrite primitive used by this repository was no longer usable on those higher versions. So that was the issue, although it appears that UFM42 may have found a workaround to actually allow this exploit to work up to 13.52, which would just be incredible because it would allow us to load the poopsploit, the net control exploit, which we're currently using up to 13.0 with the PlayStation View application. It would effectively allow us to load that jailbreak with the web browser with just a few seconds of just loading up a web page, and you'd be up and running with the jailbreak. No need to restore a backup file, no need to, burn a disk or anything like that. You'd be able to just hop on the web browser and load the jailbreak in a few seconds, which would be incredible. So that is the benefit of something like this for the PlayStation 4. And obviously we have the Celsius bug that is being looked into, which is a kernel bug that's been investigated to see if it would be useful to be turned into a new jailbreak for the PS4 and PS5. And if that does get turned into a workable jailbreak, that would work up to firmware 13.04, I believe, on the PS4. So 13.02 and 13.04 could then be triggered also using this WebKit exploit, potentially. But I believe that kernel bug also has the additional requirement of requiring a USB drive in order to trigger it. So that would be an additional requirement for that kernel bug. But that one's still being investigated to see if that's going to be usable or not. So we can see a screenshot that seems to be showing the WebKit part of the exploit loading on 13.52. Obviously, we don't have a kernel exploit to load on that firmware yet, so it's not going to actually jailbreak the console. So moving over to the PlayStation 5 Userland exploits, Gajinez shared this post that just says 13.60 with a screenshot that seems to be showing some patched code that was added in 13.60, presumably to the Java Security Manager. Apparently, this bug is incredibly old, since before the PlayStation 5 was ever launched, but for some reason it has not been patched until now, until firmware 13.60. So this would appear to be the bug that Dachinao was talking about previously, where they said that there was a bug that was patched in 13.60, but it was not the private zero-day exploit that Gejina had. It was something that was not kernel-related, aka Userland-related, so that would likely be what has been revealed here. A new Blu-ray Java bug that could potentially be turned into a Userland exploit up to firmware 13.14.2 and was patched in 13.60. But the other big development that we have is, of course, this new WebKit sandbox escape by Jordi, and it is being tested on the PS5 11.60 firmware and works at 12.0, but it could work up to the latest firmware. So it appears the latest firmware is vulnerable from what I've heard so far. I'm not sure, who's actually tested it up to 13.60 yet. So it appears that it may work up to 13.60, but this exploit seems to chain 4 different vulnerabilities together to actually make it work, which is just incredible that these managed to go through all of that work to get this working. So this would have huge implications because not only would, again, future kernel exploits be able to be triggered with the web browser on the PS5, but we haven't really had a proper web browser exploits working on the PS5 since 5.50, whereas if this one works all the way up to 13.60 and can be fully developed into a full WebKit exploit, allowing us to trigger kernel exploits with it, then it would completely change not just for future jailbreaks that come out, but also for existing jailbreaks, For instance, we'd be able to jailbreak up to 12.0 with the poopsploit without requiring a Blu-ray disc, so we can just jailbreak up to 12.0 with the web browser within a few seconds, up to 12.0. It might be able to be used with the Patience to Jailbreak exploit to jailbreak within 50 minutes through the web browser instead of through the YouTube jailbreak, but I'm not sure how well that would work through the web browser. I don't believe the web browser is super stable to be running an exploit for that long, so I'm not too sure if it would work with Patience to Jailbreak, but it would certainly be useful right now to jailbreak up to 12.0 without needing a Blu-ray disc, which would be fantastic. So if you are on 11.60, you can try out the web browser exploit right now by going to zekoxao.github.io/jordy, and that will actually run the WebKit exploit, but it will only work up to 11.60 right now, and it is just a test page to see if it loads on your console. I believe the offsets have not been added for other firmware, so even though people are testing on other firmware versions, and I believe it's not really going to run to completion on any other firmware because it's only got the offsets added for 11.60 right now, but I'm sure eventually it'll get offsets added for all the other firmwares. Then people can test on all different firmware versions to see if it works all the way up to 13.60 or not, or maybe see where the cutoff point is. But so far it looks like there's a good chance it should work up to the latest firmware 13.60, which is awesome. We take a look at my little diagram on what different jailbreaks you should consider using depending on what firmware you're on, and how this could potentially change things with these new Userland exploits. So you can see where we were before with the web browser exploit only working up to 5.50. Well, now we could potentially use the web browser exploit all the way up to 12.0 with the poopsploit, so it will jailbreak within just a few seconds. And then, of course, from 12.0 to 12.70, perhaps P2JB might be able to be implemented, but again, I'm not entirely sure if that's going to actually be stable or not. With the web browser, having the web browser running that jailbreak for that long, I feel like the web browser is probably not stable enough to maintain that, but we'll see. If not, though, we could, of course, just jailbreak up to 12.0 with the web browser and then still use the YouTube jailbreak for P2JB to jailbreak up to 12.70 as we've already been doing. And it would also completely cut out needing the Blu-ray exploits entirely. So that's how the landscape could potentially change, assuming all of this stuff can be turned into usable exploits, and the web browser exploits does actually work all the way up to the latest firmware. Now, obviously, what I'm going over here is the best case scenario. Some of these exploits are still, I guess, in that kind of an early stage and need to be chained with a kernel exploit, and we need to make sure that all works first before we can confirm that these are going to be as useful as we hope they will be. So obviously bear that in mind, but so far things are looking pretty promising. So anyway, just want to bring you guys this exciting news here of these 3 new Userland exploits, 1 for the PS4 and 2 for the PS5, that are looking very promising to be able to use them to jailbreak just with the web browser, and potentially a new Blu-ray exploits up to 13.42 as well for the PS5. Definitely going to make things a hell of a lot easier to jailbreak our consoles going forward. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video or found the